All right, I think we're live now. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our last cafecito of the spring semester. And I'm very, very excited because I think it's the first cafecito of this semester where we have two guests. And they're both amazing and have incredible advice and information, and just their journeys are great, great. Just inspiration for us to hear and learn from their experiences. So I'm very excited. Um, so welcome everyone. My name is Jose Cisneros. I am the Somos Carolina program manager at Latinx Ed. Um, and as you all probably know, or if it's your first time here, Latinx Ed is a nonprofit, educational nonprofit organization. We're based out of UNC Chapel Hill, and we work to further the educational equity and immigrant justice for Latinx people in North Carolina. Um, a little bit about my story. If this is your first time, my journey began in Mexico. I was born there and I came to the US when I was 5, grew up, was raised in rural Eastern North Carolina, which Ruby has some experience now living there. So I'm excited to hear more about her own experiences living out in rural Eastern North Carolina. Um, Grew up undocumented. Thankfully, in high school, Daca was initiated, and I was able to benefit from that program. Went off to UNC, went off to grad school, became a teacher for 3 years. I taught in Texas, and then I came back in 2020 during the pandemic. So it's been really interesting coming back to my home state in the middle of a global pandemic, but I'm very happy to be back and doing this amazing work and being surrounded by such a supportive, loving, and just amazing community in our state. So that's a little bit about myself. Now I would let either Ruby or Nayeli, whoever wants to go first, you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story and some of the work that you're doing.
I'll go first since my dogs are quiet right now. So hi everyone, I'm super happy to be here. I'm Ruby Franco Quiroz, and I am currently a graduate student at UNC Chapel Hill pursuing my master's in social work. I also went to UNC for undergrad, and I was also born in Mexico, right on the border. If you ever go to McAllen, Texas and cross right over to the other side, that's our hometown, Reynosa, Tamaulipas. I was 6 years old when we came to the US and experienced what it was like to grow up through the education system as an undocumented student. Graduated from East Chapel Hill High School, went on to UNC, and now pursuing my graduate degree. So I'm just really grateful to be here. And like Jose mentioned, have gained a whole new level of enlightenment living out here in the rural part of the state and really seeing so many different obstacles and struggles and resiliency in the students that live down here and make it through their own educational journey. So I'm happy to be here and share a little bit more about what I've been up to and some of the things that we're going to discuss today.
Hi everyone, my name is Nayeli Franco Quiroz. I was born in Reynosa, Tamaulipas. I was only a few months old when my family crossed over. So I pretty much just grew up in Chapel Hill, and I went to East Chapel Hill High School, graduated from there, and now I'm at Eastern Connecticut State University on the Opportunity Scholarship from the Dream.us.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And just to give y'all a little bit more context, when I was at UNC is when I met Ruby, and that's how we know each other and her sister. I didn't officially meet her, but I knew her because Ruby was there, and Ruby and I were involved in an organization that all of you are probably familiar with called Scholars Latinx Initiative, or SLI. So we go way back to like undergrad, way back, and I think some of you maybe saw on social media. We were co-directors, so our team would call us Rose, like the team name was Rose, so that's why you might have seen that pop up in some places. And I haven't seen Ruby since 2018. I think we established, right? 2018. It was during my first year of teaching in Texas, and I saw her in Texas in Fort Worth. So Haven't had the opportunity to see her in person, but hopefully soon because I miss you, Ruby.
I miss you too. And now we both have our vaccine. So hey,
Yes,
get
yes.
your
That's
vaccine.
exciting. And welcome everyone. I see Bibi is here, Isabella, Valentina, Emily, Elena, Daphne, Jasmine, Carol. Welcome, welcome. Parker, who is also from Snow Hill as well. Welcome everyone. Veronica, Alice is here. We're so excited just to share more information about some of the different education issues that are affecting the Latinx immigrant community specifically, and some of the work and movements and campaigns that have been occurring in our state, a lot of which Nayeli and Ruby have been very involved in. So really excited to dive deep into those topics. Before we do that, I do have a special announcement. If you're signed up for our newsletter, you probably already saw the news, but we just launched a new initiative called Latinx Fellows. So this is a fellowship for Latinx identifying educators in our state. And so it's an amazing opportunity. We're going to be dropping the link with more information and also the application in the comment section. So definitely check those out. If you're a Latinx educator or someone involved in education between the ages of 20 and 40, definitely check that opportunity out. So to get us started, I have some questions just to gain some background information. And the first one is, what are the significant education issues that are affecting Latinx immigrant students in North Carolina today?
I guess I can start. I mean, at least for me, because I am still undocumented, I'm in the process of applying for Daca. But being undocumented, like growing up, all I knew was like do good in school and you'll have scholarships given to you because you did good in school. So you'll be able to go to school. And seeing Ruby like get like scholarships here and there, I was like, okay, I have to like apply myself, do good in school, and like I'll be like, I'll have the money to go. And I know at least like for some other undocumented students, the lack of financial aid because you don't get financial aid for school, like that makes so much of a difference when you get the money to go to school because you have the money. I mean, if you don't have the money and like you want to, and like as much as you could go in debt, it's not, I mean, your parents probably more than likely won't support it. And even then, like scholarships, it's kind of competitive. Sometimes there's not enough. Sometimes they're not advocated enough, so people don't know about them. And I mean, depending on where you are in North Carolina, some people have the resources and are told, oh, you can go to school. And I mean, I know at least I have some friends like apart from Chapel Hill in the Durham area. And when I tell them, oh, I'm documented, they're like, how are you going to school? And I'm like, oh, well, I can go to school. I can still go to school. And they're like, but how? Like, you're undocumented. You can't. And it's like, it's sad because some people have that mindset and they aren't informed of like all the possibilities they have. That's not just, oh, graduate from high school and go into some type of job from like 9 to 5.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing all of that, sister. I know you went through a lot of those things firsthand. We both did. And just like a lot of many other undocumented immigrant students in our communities. And I just want to build on some of the things that Naya touched on. There's so much in terms of the financial aid aspect that Latinx immigrant families have to overcome when it comes to having access to secondary education. And it's a lot of it is the lack of knowledge about like, what is actually out there to support my kid. But there's also so much lack of access for our parents to be able to advocate within our school district. So, there's lack of interpreters. There are so many like different forms that have to be filled out when it comes to like even getting access to food every day, right? Like getting your transportation to school and back. And especially me living here in the rural area of North Carolina, I've seen a huge gap in how I've encountered kids who have to like figure out how to get to school on their own because their parents are working and they don't have access to like reliable transportation. And there's sometimes even communities that don't have access to Wi-Fi. And right now with the pandemic, I know so many different issues of equity were exposed throughout COVID, and it became very, very clear there are so many gaps, but it comes to an economic access gap. There's a socioeconomic like gap that's just huge, right? Like you add that on top of lack of access to advocate for yourself, and you add that to if your parents are working all the time and you don't have really that much support at home, and not because they don't want to, but because in their mindset it's like, we got to survive, we got to live, and we got to work all the time. So not having the institutional support, and then on top of that having not having enough economic support at home. Some students are not worried about their homework if they're worried about their parents, if they're worried about what are they going to eat, if they're worried about the fact that they can't even log into their classes. There's not going to be a lot of motivation there to really support you through your education. And I know right now having to go virtual, that's kind of a very unique sort of challenge that came to light, but if we think about it, pre-pandemic, having Wi-Fi at home is a huge game changer for whether you're able to really understand your work. Can you watch a YouTube video that explains things, like really breaks things down for you if you don't have access to tutoring? I think especially in like urban areas, or specifically growing up in the Chapel Carborough City School District, we had after school programming all the time. We had access to clubs like the Minority Student Achievement Network, and we're able to meet together and help each other out and really build a sense of community at school. But with here in rural North Carolina, I've seen their schools are incredibly segregated, and it's really difficult to find like a sense of community in these schools when you feel like your teachers don't see you, don't motivate you, don't really care if you're present or not. And then add on top of that all the other issues that I just mentioned, where this child has to be incredibly resilient to really get through the school district. And what happens to the students who self-internalize a lot of what they're seeing around them and don't have those motivational like factors in their life to really push them back to being at a level where they can even be like mentally present. And so there's so many things that go along with a lot of issues of equity in our education system. And I think a lot of it too, we have to have laws and policies and efforts and campaigns and educators that are willing to come to the forefront and say, this is an issue. We have racial, economic, we have overall opportunity issues and gaps with our Latinx immigrant students, with our Black students, with our Indigenous students. Like where are they being advocated for? Like who is advocating for them, and where is that presence in every single meeting that you're at, whether it's a school board meeting, whether it's just a faculty meeting? Who is bringing to light some of the issues that your students who are the most vulnerable are going through, if it's not you?
Oof, y'all, this is gonna get deep, 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 because I was writing down some notes of some of the things you were bringing up, and I think one of the important ones, right, when you're thinking about our immigrant populations, right, in North Carolina specifically, whether it's one person in the family or whether it's a whole family, like undocumented immigrants are present in our immigrant families for the most part. We have a lot of students, right, like you said, mixed status families, or students are undocumented. So this is like an important thing that I think you brought up, because a lot of people, first of all, they don't understand the immigration system. And we have people working in education systems, running schools, teaching students, whose views about immigration are like not informed. They're a lot of the times racist, and that impacts severely like the way they engage with the students. And it's just like you said, in rural areas, especially, right, politics, immigration, the debate around it, there's not a lot of debate in terms of like who's running schools and their views about immigration in a lot of cases. And they're really negative views, and they're really detrimental to the way they engage with our community. So that was something I think you brought up that is super important for, I think, our audience or anyone watching this later to really think about, like, how are people and their understanding of immigration and the complexity of immigration and how it impacts our students. I think that's so important to educate ourselves on. And then you brought up a really good point, I think, when you're thinking about, especially in rural parts, of the different layers that affect immigrant students, Latinx immigrant students, when you're thinking not just about immigration status, you're thinking about socioeconomic status, right? Like there's a lot of poverty in rural parts of North Carolina. I grew up in rural North Carolina, Greene County, one of the poorest counties in our state. And that was reflected in our education at that time. We were in the, I think when I was in high school, we were in like the bottom 5% of the state, because poverty was an issue affecting so many students, and especially immigrant students, when they had parents who were seasonal workers because they could only work, I don't know, like during certain seasons of the year, depending on the crops that were being grown that year. We had some students who were migrant workers where they would come in during certain parts of the year and then leave. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, how does that affect the student when they have to transition like during random periods of the year, school year, to different schools? And all of these schools, for the most part, are not giving them the resources they need, the attention they need, and the care like that they need, right? Translation, support after school, access to food when they don't have it at home, right? Like those are just issues that our schools just a lot of times even refuse like to acknowledge or view as valuable resources that our communities need. So that was, I think, really cool that you brought up, because there is a lot of differences between urban areas. Like in Chapel Hill, I wasn't in an urban area, but when I was at UNC, I really got to see like there's so many resources, and there's still some problems, but there's at least some more resources that students can have access to, whereas in a lot of rural parts there are basically not any resources at all. So really thinking about how, depending on where you're working, right, how you can make a difference and how you can advocate for students and immigrant families, and give them a voice, because we're left out of the system, right? Our voices are not counted. The system was not built for us, right? Like we don't have a voice in that system. So we have to find people that can support us, and we can insert ourselves into those systems as well, right? Latinx Fellows, like I said, check it out. And so, yeah, those were really good points, I think, that you brought up. And I hope our audience is getting a really good sense of the different issues that are affecting Latinx immigrant students specifically here in our state.
Jose, I also wanted to add, there's also just kind of like educators, in the system, when they have to reflect the policy and the policies are not supporting Latinx or like BIPOC students. There are ways that educators can advocate, of course, always have a strong stance for a student, but also, what do these policies, like they need to be very like cognizant and recognized and aware how these policies make students feel. Because, you're wondering why you have a student who's unmotivated, who doesn't feel like the school district they are in values them in any way. So why should they be motivated in school? And then you've got, laws, for example, like we have a law in the state of North Carolina, or some sort of policy that makes citizen children appeal their residency if their parents are undocumented, so that they can actually have in-state tuition. So what is that saying to that student? How is that student, taking this law restriction in and internalizing it? It's every part of, the system is telling you, you don't matter, or you have to prove yourself. You have to prove you're worthy. And that's kind of a message that we see echoed across all our school districts. But also, are we reflected in literature? Are we openly talking about race? Are we openly talking about inequity in our school districts, in the classroom? Are teachers using curriculums to bring to light these issues that very much affect their students at a very individual one-on-one basis? Those are the kinds of things that, are difficult, but they're conversations and forms of advocacy that anyone can engage in, and that especially educators should really be looking into within each district that they're working in.
Yeah, and I was thinking, like in high school, or like whenever we're thinking about immigrant students that succeed, right? Like how we're looking at them as like stories of they were able to succeed, and like we put them like, oh, like if they can do it, then anyone else can do it. But you brought up such a good point where it's like, this system is literally like crushing students' dreams, motivations, like it's crushing them inside. And it's starting from like a really early age, and they get to the point, right, where they don't believe in themselves. They've internalized all this negative messaging, all the deficit thinking that they're approached with from the school, and really like it impacts you and the way you see yourself. Like you said, we don't see ourselves reflected in what we're studying, what we're reading, who we're looking at on in terms of like examples of people that go to college, how we're seeing like measures of success being like very like white middle class standards. Like all of this is messaging that we're getting from such an early age. And the system just looks at the few that were able to somehow survive and get through the system and succeed, right, and go to college. But they don't realize, like they are failing to realize, or even a lot of times just don't even want to realize how the system like crushes students, like, and what they want to achieve, and all the beauty and all the dreams and all the, you know, resiliency that is already in our families, just because our journeys coming to this nation and navigating this system, that a lot of the times, right, like they don't, that's not taken into account. That's not viewed as valuable. That's not viewed as something worthy of the system even acknowledging. So that was such a good point that you brought up. All right, so moving now more into when we're thinking about past movements or individuals that have inspired current campaigns, can you think of any movements or individuals that have fought for educational equity in North Carolina that are inspiring like current movements and campaigns?
Well, I was part of SLY when it was before like Somos Carolina and all that. So definitely Alice and Elaine and Ricky. They made a huge impact, like especially Alice the last year, my senior year. Oh my God. I have to thank her so much for everything she did. But they always just remind you, and they're always so positive, and they always like inform you of opportunities. They post about it. They stay on top of things so you can stay on top of things. And I mean, growing up, my sister, like the main role model right here next to me, she always was advocating for different stuff. She was always involved. And I mean, when I was in high school, I had some things I was involved in, but there was never really like a undocumented like club or some type of thing for support. And yeah, so I would say just Elaine, Alice, Ricky, and my sister mainly were like the main influencers.
Yeah, and I'd love to also, sister, I love you. Thanks for that. You're gonna make me teary-eyed in this live. But you know, we've got, I growing up, I was involved with several different campaigns and movements. I always have to reference back to the OG team that I remember just hearing growing up, which was the NC Dream Team, as a huge movement and organization that tried to push time and time again for so many different policy changes to bring equity to the undocumented community and really elevate the voices of undocumented folks who, even at that time, because, you know, we're in a different era now, but there was a time where even saying I'm undocumented was the most terrifying thing, right? Like you couldn't even like be in a room and say, yeah, I'm undocumented, because even our parents were terrified. Some parents wouldn't even tell their children they were undocumented because of that fear of they don't need to know because nobody needs to know. And then you got NC Dream Team coming out with these shirts that say undocumented, unafraid. And that's like, you know, what sticks in my mind. I remember seeing a picture with my friend Marco wearing a shirt like that for the first time in my life when I was in high school. And I was just like, what, like people are wearing those, like, you know, where do I go, like where are people gathering? And, you know, bringing to light what Naya is saying, there are no safe gathering spaces or no real open organizations that just say like, we're going to focus on supporting undocumented youth. And, you know, how do we elevate the voices of undocumented youth, until we came to SLY. And, you know, and I think that's kind of, it's really important to recognize that there is a lack of organizational or just like overall community support that rallies around undocumented youth. And through your childhood, you see that, like you see that there is no one else saying, oh yeah, I'm undocumented. And now to see people on TV say that they're undocumented, like that was groundbreaking. I remember watching The Fosters, and the first time I ever saw, like that was the first show I ever saw bring a Daca student related issue to the screen. And that was, I cried, like I sobbed, because it was huge for me. It was so influential. And, I know at UNC we had at one point, and also like statewide, there was the One State, One Rate campaign, again, just recognizing undocumented youth have to pay out of state tuition, even though we grew up here, our entire lives. I know EdNC does incredible work. If you're watching and you haven't checked out their website, they have a podcast. Ricky was recently on it. They have just like, they're always dropping bombs of truth and just like really taking all of this, the latest news and education happening across the state and putting it at the forefront. Greg Meyer has been for a long time throughout my youth, was a champion of education equity in my community. He funded and coordinated the Blue Ribbon Mentor Advocate program, which both myself and my sister went through. And through that program, we were able to have access to, folks that constantly supported us and filled our hearts and souls with belief that we were great, that, we could do it. Like anything we wanted was possible. And there are just not enough children in our state, specifically children of Latinx immigrants, children that live in poverty, children that live in these rural communities, Black children, BIPOC, like all BIPOC, like not hearing where do you want to go? And we can make it happen. And you have a support system here, there, like, can we create networks of support around every child so that they feel like in a moment of desperation, they have someone they can turn to? And can we also then prevent them getting to a moment of desperation? And then how do we like keep building this network so that they never have to feel that they're at risk of something? And I think that's honestly like the work that I do, that's what I'm passionate about, is how can we genuinely build these networks of support to make sure every child feels loved and worthy. And it's not just at home. I saw someone say that in the comments, and I love that. Yeah, children are deserving of feeling loved and supported and motivated. And it doesn't just, it shouldn't just be at home, because they spend the majority of their time in school. So, like teachers, educators, your school district, even events that your school district puts on, are you reflected? Is your culture, is your experience reflected in all of these events and things that are going on around you for the majority of your childhood? I also just want to give a big shout out to the Wake County Black Student Coalition, because I love their work too.
Yeah, I think you brought up one important thing that I remember early at my time in not high school, early on at UNC was the One State, One Rate campaign, because that was something I think that had gained a lot of momentum, especially with Daca coming out in 2012. And the few years after that, like I think there was like a lot of hope, right, that something like that our state legislator would finally get their act together and pass tuition equity for undocumented immigrants. But I remember before that, I don't know if it was like when I was in middle school or high school. At one point, I think undocumented immigrants couldn't even like go to college, or there was like a proposal to bar us from entering college, like public universities. So like we've had to fight, first of all, to be like even let into these spaces, even if it's out of state tuition. Like we've had to fight to just be let into like places of higher education. And if you think about it, and I say this, and I've heard this many times, and I say it as well, like the state has invested in our education for most of us since we were in kindergarten or from elementary school. They've invested in our education from that time through high school, and then they want to stop us from continuing our educational journey. And so like in my mind, that just makes no sense. Like you've already spent, or not spent, like we've paid into the system, right? Our parents pay taxes, because I'll say it again, undocumented people pay taxes, all forms of taxes, any form of tax you can think of, we pay into the system that we are getting educated in. Yes, we need more changes, but we are getting educated in the system. We're paying into it, and we deserve and have the right to go to college and not have to pay out of state tuition when we've already been in the system all of these years, right? And so that's such an issue that it's still, like you said, affecting our undocumented immigrant student population in the state, because North Carolina is still behind, unlike some of the other states in the US, that they've passed their sort of own versions of the DREAM Act, right? Where they grant in-state tuition and even financial resources to undocumented students. I mean, even Texas, like states like that, have passed their own DREAM Acts, and North Carolina just has not done it, right? There's so much debate around it. There's so much division. People are just, sometimes I don't even want to hear your stories, because I remember, I think I was like in a sophomore, yeah, right before my junior year at UNC, when I was a student action with farm workers intern, and I was doing work at the General Assembly in Raleigh. We had like the undocumented graduation, which is like an annual event where undocumented students get together. They go and they sort of lobby and make the case for why we need and deserve in-state tuition. And there were legislators there who like literally closed the door on us because they didn't want to talk to us. We have people like this in our government making decisions that affect our daily lives. And it's just, people don't know this, right? Because they're not the ones being affected. They're not the ones who have to go and make a case for why we deserve and need and are worthy of gaining in-state tuition in our state. So I just, you brought up a good point about some of that campaigns, and that's what I remembered, just connected to the one state, one rate campaign. But I don't know, do you want to talk about like more like generally like the history of Daca and like how youth kind of like led the movement for Daca?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of folks don't know this, but Daca did not just come to light because former President Barack Obama woke up one day and said, you know what, I've met with a lot of these kids and I just love them and I need to do something and I've got to, change. Something's got to come out of this to support them. No, what actually happened was back when he was running again for re-election, there were undocumented youth. This was a huge like countrywide effort. And there were undocu youth that were literally sitting in and shutting down his reelection campaign conferences and events. And it got to the point where they were like, we're going to keep doing this until you meet with us. So good luck getting reelected if we're like shutting down and we're doing sit-ins and protesting at all of your talks and speeches that you want to give across the country. So he had to meet with leaders of the movement, essentially. And then from that came the announcement of DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. A lot of misconstrued information around DACA as well. I always it's interesting because you kind of gaze at like who's present in the audience when you're talking to like big groups of people to gauge like who, or do people actually in this space actually know, about DACA, or do they not? And then it's sad because the majority of the time, even folks that you feel like more safe around are still very uneducated on how DACA works. DACA is not, any form of residency or any path to citizenship. It is what's 2-year renewal process. So every 2 years, you have to renew it like over and over again. And you pay a lot of money. You got to pay a lot of lawyer fees. You pay for the actual DACA application. You pay your attorney. You got to do your biometrics. You get fingerprinted to be in this system. And that is also, a lot of people say like, well, why don't these kids just get DACA? And there are families out there that are still wary and fearful of putting all of their information into the system, because essentially that is what happens. And going back to when Trump rescinded DACA, I remember obsessively refreshing the DHS page, the Department of Homeland Security's page, to try to pinpoint what were they going to do with all of the information of all the undocumented youth that were in the system. And I remember specifically like bullet points of them still telling us they did not know where that information was going to go. And they had, up to that point, had not thought through like what was going to happen with all of our information. And that was terrifying, because as a child, your worst fear is, did I just put my parents on this radar? And what is going to happen to my family? And with DACA, you have the ability to work, you get a social security, you get a authorization permit to work, and all of this expires together. So every time your authorization would expire, your license expires, it's a whole process. It is extremely exhausting. It's emotionally draining. And then also it's incredibly anxiety inducing when you're waiting throughout this time period and just waiting to hear like, okay, is it going to get approved? Is it going to get renewed? You don't know, and you can't get like a concrete answer from your attorney aside from, I see no reason as to why it won't. But, you don't like, that doesn't ease my anxiety. I don't know what that, you're not telling me, yes, like, I want to hear you say, yes, it's going to get approved. And it's, all of these like psychological deteriorators to youth and exist in our society, and there are not enough people checking in on this youth. Like, who's checking in on our undocumented youth and asking them, are you okay? And how can I help? Like, how can I support you? And it, even when it goes to school districts, like, honestly, Jose is the only undocumented teacher I know today. I have not met or know of any other teachers that are undocumented. Like, can we echo into the classroom what our world and society looks like? Children should be in school seeing and feeling comfortable around the adults they're surrounded by. But when the majority of the adults are surrounded by every day don't reflect what you see at home, don't reflect what you see in your neighborhood, don't reflect you and your identity, it's really hard to feel comfortable in these spaces and to really try to thrive and put all of your effort and motivation into doing well. And so, sorry, but sister, do you want to?
I mean, I can, echo on that. I mean, I took honors and AP classes, but I was like the one female Latina in the class. There was maybe like one other African American student, but it was hard to like speak up in class. Like, it was the small things. Like, I was always so anxious to like say anything because you would always just get looked at. And I felt like sometimes my voice didn't matter compared to like, these white like kids like in the class. And even some teachers would try to like just be like hola and like be friendly in Spanish, but like it was just so awkward. Like, I know they're trying, but it didn't help. Like, and I mean, when you don't have, like Ruby said, people that look like you, like educators that can maybe like have some type of similar experience being a Hispanic Latina like in the South, like it's just hard and it's draining sometimes. But yeah, I mean, like going back to what someone has said, like it's not just being supported at home, it's being supported in the school system because you do spend most of your time there.
Yeah, I think the issue about like how immigrant students feel at school, and I remember like in high school, I think Ruby, you were mentioning that at one point, right? Like in time, if you said you were undocumented, like God knows what could have happened to you, because like it's not an issue that was discussed or like even taught in a way that helped us understand our own stories, because there was so much like internal conflict about my like journey and like the shame that I felt of like being undocumented and the fear that I felt about telling people, and like it's just everything that our society was like telling me, right? And the things I would like see on television, it was becoming internalized in a very like negative way inside of me. And I remember like people would be at, I think around like 2012, the immigration debate got even more like tense nationwide around the nation, right? Because it was everywhere. It was on the presidential debates. It was on everywhere, and so it came up a few times in school. Like one time during class, and other times like people would kind of like talk about it. A few times people would straight up ask me like, "Are you illegal?" Like things like that would just come up. Yeah. Like they would like straight up ask me if I was legal, and like just the fear. Like I just could never say. And like I would literally say no, like I flew here. Like I would lie because it was like I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I knew anyone who had gone through my journey. Even like I think between and amongst like my fellow like immigrant household friends, Latinos, Latinx people in my community, there was not a lot of talk between ourselves, because again, like society was telling us like that is like bad, it's a crime, you're illegal, etc. Like all these negative messaging that even prevented us from talking to each other and trying to process what we were going through. It was just a very like, in a way, toxic environment, really, to grow up in and not be able to like understand your story and learn to like appreciate, because it's not a crime, one, and two, like your story, like it's part of who you are, and you should be able to like feel comfortable in your own skin and really like take ownership and find power in your voice, and so many things that like are not happening in school with pretty much like any student who is not in a privileged position or is a certain color of skin. So yeah, like just the way you were saying about just not feeling safe, not feeling seen and valued and honored in school, like it was very much like, I think it's part of our own experiences, not just myself, but everyone I think who's in similar situations, especially like if you're an undocumented student. So I think I want to talk a little bit more now about the different movements or the different campaigns that are working currently to create educational equity for our Latinx immigrant students in North Carolina. Anything you know that is maybe happening now, or anything you're involved in that you would like to share with our audience?
Sorry, I was waiting to see if my sister wanted to take this one, but yeah, I mean, I think there is always something, there's always a door that you can pursue, and no matter where you are. And it's really about doing the research and looking into it, because I know even here, I thought like, oh, I felt for a long time in Wayne County, North Carolina, Dublin County, North Carolina, there's nothing out here. I don't see anything. I did my research. I didn't find anything. And then one day I came across my sister-in-law sharing a post of one of her friends who's doing similar work to what Latinx Ed is doing, and trying to provide local youth here in the county with knowledge and just like general information, like saying let's try to break down, what's possible for each child and what's possible for you, and you can go to college. Like no matter what anyone tells you, every child in our state can go to college. And just seeing something like that, I was like, oh my God, like who is this person? I like looked into it, and she's doing just like this very local sort of network, building a local network to try to push youth to not be afraid to try to get into college. And I think that's so powerful, especially when it's like local work, and to see someone from your community reflected, it's so important and so crucial. So like wherever you are in your community, I always say like, do your research, try to figure out, don't like double the work and try to start from scratch and like, build on. It's better always to like build and bring your efforts and your knowledge and your experiences to something that's already like, present, so that you can just like help it like grow and expand even greater. Of course, there's always like a need for more. So if you're wanting to really start something fresh, always look to partner with local organizations. But doing your research is just really important, because there are a lot of people who are well-intentioned, or a lot of people who really want to do some incredible work, but they don't have like sort of a leg into the community. So you being that like champion of the community, I highly encourage every like person to get involved and like try to push themselves. I know Latinx Ed, y'all are always killing it, doing amazing work. I mentioned Ed News before. There are so many different or kind of like campaigns or orgs or things that are run by people of color. And like, if you really want to like contribute to marginalized communities, I would say focus on that. There's something in Orange County. It's called like, I think it's like Hate Free Schools. And it's Latondra. She's running that amazing effort to try to build educational equity across our district. Or in the Orange County School District, because there's a huge difference between Orange County school districts and Chapel Hill Carver School District. And if you're not in tune into that, you need to be, especially if you're from the area, because the amount of the disproportion in like just funding and just sort of like the allocation of resources to those two counties or to those two districts is just mind-blowing, being that they're both in the same county. But there are a lot of factors if you look at demographics and like the location and just kind of like geographically like where Orange County School District is. there are a lot of factors that play into why that is the case, and it shouldn't be the case. So definitely plug yourself into that.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good, I think, organizations, movements that are fighting. I think we talked about tuition equity, and that's still an issue, right, in our state. And that's definitely something I want to look more into because it's still affecting undocumented students. Even with Daca, right? We talked about the history of Daca. There's so many students. I think North Carolina is in like the top 10 states with Daca recipients. So undocumented students that are now in the Daca program, and there's still like not tuition equity. Like even though they have a work permit, even though they have a social security number, you still don't qualify for in-state tuition in the state, even at the community college level. Like no matter what public institution you want to attend, even if you have DACA or you're undocumented, you still don't qualify. So that's definitely something to look into. And I think what I've been like really admiring with our College y Consejos program has been the work that they're doing to help, especially like mixed status families, because a lot of cases now are students who are born in the US or who have documentation, but whose parents are undocumented, who don't have any form of documentation. So I think one of you brought up this issue of qualifying for in-state tuition. There's now like another thing they added so that you qualify for in-state tuition. And if you come from mixed status families, you could run into some issues because of the way the system was built. Very like intentionally in a lot of ways to try to prevent some mixed status families from getting the resources that they deserve and that they need, like tuition equity, right? In-state tuition is important because they qualify for it, no matter if your parents are undocumented, no matter like where they were from or what status they have. Like if you were born in the state and your parents have been paying taxes, so you deserve and you need and you qualify for in-state tuition. And so just like barriers like that exist, that I think I've been very inspired by the work that College y Consejos is doing to help those families. So yeah, shout out to College y Consejos. But yeah, definitely all the other organizations that Ruby and Ayeli have been discussing and mentioning, definitely check those out. But I did want to gain some of your like own experiences that you've been working on as two young undocumented or formerly documented people. What are certain experiences or movements that have you've participated in that have made you like proud of your role in our community?
Well, recently with like the whole Black Lives Matter protests, I was part of that. It was like my first like big protest, and it was like kind of overwhelming. But I thought I felt a sense of like power, like I felt powerful at the same time because I was like, oh well, like I'm helping my allies, I'm being part of like a change. And in high school, I did do like some programs dealing with just mental health awareness for everybody, minorities especially, because I know like there's this stigma that's like you can't be weak, or like my parents had it harder than I than I did, so my emotions aren't validated and like or just belittled compared to theirs. I also worked for like addressing the school to prison pipeline. Ruby had mentioned MSAN, which is like the Minority Student Leadership Network, and they just pretty much focus on the achievement gap, because I know in Chapel Hill, like Carbondale City Schools, it was really bad. It was like one of the highest ones up there, and I mean it's amazing, and like they like kind of cover it because they give you resources and you have resources, but in reality they kind of forget about the other students that aren't encouraged and are still in poverty. So it's sad. But that's kind of some of the work I did, and addressing signs and signals of like school shooters, because there was a lot of threats for our school before and nobody was really talking about it. So that's mainly the work I've done. I do want to get more into like undocumented supporting communities and stuff, but yeah, so I usually try just to attend conferences or just talks about the undocumented community here because they offer a lot. So like Ruby said, do your research. If you see something, look into it. you can't really go wrong with attending something and just having an open mind and listening.
Find your passion. Find your passion. Like, what do you want to pour your heart and energy and soul into that connects to change and the building of an equitable society? And I think that's like the key where a lot of folks get confused, like what is, equal versus like equitable and like equity. And equal is not like everyone being on the, on the same playing field, because folks have been oppressed for so long that there has to be a greater push so that we can have like a more equitable society for people who have been, marginalized and vulnerable and struggling and just in these spaces of vulnerability for so long. And so, for me, it's always been growing up, I saw our entire neighborhood was the perfect example of a community that was vulnerable all the time, very fearful. We lived in a small trailer park right off Weaver Dairy Road in Chapel Hill. So we were rerouted into a different school, elementary school, just about every 3 years. Like I started at Sewell's Elementary School, got changed to Ephesus. My brother started at Ephesus, got transferred to Morris Grove. My sister started at Morris Grove, was transferred to Estes Hills. And that was in the span of us three growing up. We were rerouted to a different school that many times. And that I just remember my first form of advocacy ever, or like protest. Our entire neighborhood got together and started talking, and someone mentioned to us like, oh, they have these school board meetings. We had no idea what that was, but they were like, you should go, all of you, and talk to the school board and ask them not to reroute your children again. And someone, I don't remember exactly who organized it, but I just remember everyone in the community being like, vamos a raitear, like let's carpool, let's make it happen, let's go. Like vans full of people, like we just showed up, had signs. I remember seeing Lori Clark there, and a huge advocate of Black lives in our community, and just feeling like all this support. And that was the first time I really felt like a big sense of support for people who were undocumented or people that look like me. And I remember talking at the school board meeting because my mom's best friend, her son has a lot of learning disabilities, and she cried and just begged, like, please don't transfer my child again. He cannot deal with yet another adjustment. And he's already been rerouted. We've already been like rerouted once, like, don't do it to him again. And when we got the decision and notification and we were told we were going to be like rerouted again, like everyone was so heartbroken. And I just remember it was like for a moment we felt so supported, and then it just died because we were like, well, the leaders of our community don't think we matter enough to not be rerouted yet again. And redistricted, that's the word, redistricted, like, so like over and over and over again. And it's just, it doesn't make sense to do that to children. And it was always our neighborhood, because on that road that we were the easiest, we were the easiest group of people that would make no fuss, that the people that, or they thought would make no fuss, that we would just have to adapt. We were on a city bus route, and that was the wildest thing for me because I went to Ephesus. So all of my friends went to a different middle school than I did, because I was one of the few kids that was at that school because my neighborhood was rerouted. So I didn't actually go to high school with any of my friends from middle school. And it's just like so wild, to think. And elementary school, same thing with elementary school. When I left elementary school, all of my friends went to Phillips and I went to Smith. And it was like I just remembered thinking, like recognizing those things. Like, why is it always us that have to get like redistricted? Like, why are we always targeted when they do these things? It's always our neighborhood. And a lot of times, like kids recognize these things, even if they're unable to vocalize them, like they can recognize the authenticity and like how genuine you are being in your efforts to support them. And that's why like just showing up can be so powerful. Like, just showing up to a BLM protest, just going to a meeting to learn, to hear people's experiences, to hear people's stories. You can just dip your toes in there. And that was my first experience with advocacy. Since then, I'm not even going to list them all out. I just decided I'm just going to go plug myself wherever I can, because I'm all about elevating undocumented lives. And I do want to give a huge shout out to Sambra, because they do just the most, to me, like some of the most well-organized, effective, and incredible work. that the state is fortunate to receive. Siembra, just being on the front lines all the time. There's an organization in Charlotte that was just featured in the documentary on Netflix, Immigration Nation. If you haven't watched that, watch Immigration Nation. It is disheartening, but it is very accurate, and it is very much to today's like current cultural or current immigration climate. So yeah, thank y'all for listening to me ramble on and on.
It's just something that I was thinking, I was thinking about it as you were talking, and also because my sister was mentioning some things about like how like our own journeys have inspired us to do the work that we're doing. I don't know if that's the case for you all. Like, do you feel like what you're doing now, what you're studying, because I know Nayeli is in college right now, like, do you think that your background, like your own struggles, your own journeys, like kind of like led you to want to get involved and like study a certain thing or go into a certain career?
Definitely. I mean, I can't see myself like majoring in anything else. I'm double majoring in criminology and sociology for like this exact reason. And yeah, like I don't know. I just want to help. Like I know there's an issue. There's always been an issue. It's still an issue. It continues to be an issue, and it will continue to be. But yeah, so I mean, I want to somehow make it and be part of the people that change the system and stuff, because it's sad. I mean, like I know I had it like better than some other kids because I grew up like in the suburbs, because the rural areas are a lot more different than the suburbs. But that doesn't mean that we should still have to deal with like the stuff we dealt with. So yeah.
All right. So I think we're approaching our end here, but I know, like I said in the beginning, we have a lot of, especially like college students, some high school students are in our audience. And we've kind of shared some of like the things that you suggest you could do, but do you have any other like advice for someone that's interested in getting involved in activism that is maybe doubtful of their skills or their leadership potential?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, dip your toes in the water little by little, sign petitions. That's like the easiest, quickest, fastest form of advocacy. Find things you care about, start making a list. Yeah, make the phone calls, email people, write a letter. Letters go a really long way. And I've seen the impact of letters from a dreamer in one time in DC. We were lobbying, I remember, for a bill for the anyways, we were lobbying for a bill, and someone wrote a letter, and it was because that person we had identified was like kind of on the fence and like kind of swaying back and forth, wasn't sure what they were going to do and how they were going to vote. And their letter was the reason that person voted for the bill. And I remember like hearing them say that in the floor when they were talking, like, I'm actually received a letter from a young man today, and they're the reason I'm going to vote yes for this. And that like opened my eyes to sometimes, even we're all like still human, and emotion is very important. It's so easy for a lot of our politicians to be so disconnected from the issues that it directly impact us because they don't live it. They don't, they probably don't even know someone who's undocumented until they meet you in their office a lot of the time. And then I've had, some folks tell me, I didn't know you couldn't get FAFSA as an undocumented student. I was like, yeah, no, I don't, they want to know, are you like, there's just so much misinformation out there. So I won't get into that rabbit hole. Sign petitions, write letters, make phone calls, follow activist accounts. Like there are so many accounts. We're all about social media, Twitter, Instagram, like even on TikTok, like you can follow folks who have some really strong campaigns or platforms and know a lot of people. Like you could follow one account that follows all these accounts that are equally or doing just about the same amount of work in that same issue. So now you're connected to like by following one account to all these organizations that are doing that, pushing for that same effort. Repost, super easy, just repost, something someone's sharing that you never know who's watching your story. That could be like, whoa, I didn't think about that. Have conversation with your parents, friends, allies, everybody. Have the difficult conversations. Learn about other people's experiences that are a little bit or could be similar to yours. You can never know, like knowledge is just so rich, and take it all in, soak it all in as much as you can. Read news articles to stay updated. Super easy to do that too. You can always do that. They get released every day. And I know we're like 1 minute short, so Jose.
No, we're good. Sometimes we even go over. It's totally fine. But thank you. Yeah, I think it's super important. If you're in our audience and you, no matter what age you are, I think there's a place for everyone because justice demands that everyone is involved in order to achieve like justice, and we're all like like challenging our own biases and the way we think about the world, reimagining systems that have not worked for certain groups historically, right? There's so much work that is needed on a personal level, like family level, like Ruby said, right? Like it's so important to talk to your families as well. Like that's something that I've been doing more recently with my sisters as well. Like how do we help our parents educate our family as a whole on other issues that maybe don't impact us directly, but that they are impacting our communities. So just yeah, finding ways to like get knowledgeable and interact with people, like learn about different issues. And like she said, they said there's different ways of getting involved, right? Doesn't mean you have to go straight out and like, I don't know, demand or do a sit-in, right? But you can take baby steps, right? Like we can all do our part. And there's different ways to get involved, and there's different movements and there's different organizations, like some of the ones we've already said. So definitely check out, right? Like I said, everyone I think needs to get involved in order for us to achieve justice, and everyone needs to get involved in one way or another. And the more you are involved and the more people are involved, the better hopefully this world will start becoming, because there's still a lot of inequity, there's still a lot of injustice. And so I hope that through this cafecito you've gotten more sense of the issues that are affecting our Latinx immigrant students specifically. Thank you, Ruby and Nayeli, for sharing your stories, because they are powerful, they are inspirational, and they are valued, and everyone should be able to share their story just like the way that we have been doing here. So I thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And I was really excited to kind of like catch up a little bit, but hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person soon. So is there anything else you want to end with before we end this cafecito? Awesome. All right, y'all. So just a few closing announcements. Like I said, thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for joining us. If this is your first time, if you're coming back, we're so excited. Definitely feel free to share this cafecito video. We also post them on YouTube, so you can share the YouTube link later. Check our website out. If there's any way you want to help, there's definitely I think the donation button somewhere. If you feel conveyed and want to help us at our organization, remember there's also our new initiative for educators, Latinx educators. If you're between the ages of 20 and 40, definitely check out the link that was posted in the comments. And yeah, go check out organizations that are helping immigrant communities. There's a lot of them. There's different ways to get involved, and I hope you learned a lot through this cafecito. So have a great day, everyone, and thank you, Ruby and Ayeli.
Thank y'all. Thank y'all so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.